Hello, I'm Jane Robertson, the Director of Communications for Frog Systems, the creators of the employee wellbeing streaming service, Ashia. Welcome to this important discussion about supporting people with a disability, with a physical disability in the workplace. Now, while we understand that there are many different types of disability, for this conversation, we are going to focus on physical disability. Now, we have a brilliant panel of guests for you who have all appeared on the list of Britain's most influential disabled people, and they have direct experience of the challenges faced by those with a physical disability when it comes to getting work and then progressing in your chosen career. So without further ado, let's meet them. First up is Isaac Harvey, MBE. Isaac is president of Wheels and Wheelchairs, a charity that brings together skaters and wheelchair users to enjoy accessible sport. Isaac is a leading campaigner for accessible workplaces and disability rights, a freelance videographer, and a confirmed adrenaline junkie. Welcome, Isaac. Lovely to have you here. Great stuff. Next up is Jane Hatton, a disabled social entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, award winner and author. Jane founded and is CEO of Evenbreak, a social enterprise that provides the only global specialist disability jobs board run by and for disabled people. Jane, thanks so much for being here today.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
And to complete our panel, Josh Wintersgill. Josh is an award-winning entrepreneur, lobbyist, campaigner, and would-be Paralympian. Josh is the founder and director of AbleMove, designing products to help himself and other wheelchair users to lead a more dignified life. Josh, thanks for joining the panel today.
Thanks so much.
And as always, thank you for joining us for this brilliant and important conversation. We welcome your questions, so do please post anything that you would like to ask our guests in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them as we talk about this important issue. So I guess the first thing that I'd like to do with all three of our guests really is for each of you to explain a little bit more about your own disability and the challenges that you have faced. So Isaac, perhaps could I start with you? Can you sort of tell us a little bit about your own story and the challenges that you've faced?
Sure. So I've got a physical disability called limb pelvic hypoplasia, which means I have no upper limbs, short legs, weak pelvis, so I'm not able to walk, but I do use a electric wheelchair to get around, scoliosis, and on top of all of that, acid reflux. So a lot of different barriers. And I guess the first time where it became quite difficult to work was actually during school, having to have learning support assistants during class because I wasn't able to write things down. I wasn't able to like put my hand up when I wanted to answer a question. So I had to have a lot of support during school just to be able to do a lesson. And that also included having meals, and if I needed personal care as well, that all needed to be put in place. So then when getting into work and wanting to be a creative, because I've always had a creative mind, and doing media studies and A-levels, I wanted to get into film and content creation. And for me, I've never been able to really hold a camera and film myself. So I've had to rely on others to support, and that's come with its barriers because not usually it's friends or family members who help, but they're not always about to do so. So sometimes I miss out on opportunities to go out and film. Luckily, as you can see, I'm lying down now, and that's how I use the computer with my feet, so I can independently do that. But the actual physical going out and filming, or sometimes traveling, I do need that person, and things can become quite difficult when that's not in place, really.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that, Isaac. What a set of challenges that you've overcome and that you continue to sort of challenge, I guess, all the time. And thank you for being here as part of this panel. So Jane, tell us a little bit about your background and the challenges that you've had, because if I remember, disability wasn't something that you had experience of until partway through your working life.
Yeah, that's right, Jane. I'm one of the 83% of disabled people who weren't born with our condition. My mother was disabled, but I didn't really have much experience of disability, although ironically, I was in the field of diversity and inclusion. And I had a riding accident in my early 20s and broke my back, which sounds really drastic, and it wasn't. I was young, fit, healthy. It healed within a few weeks. But it must have damaged all the discs in my spine. And as I got older, so when I was 44, I became very disabled with back pain and had a number of spinal surgeries to try and correct that, some of which were more successful than others. And at one point, I was literally unable to stand or walk or even sit. So I did spend 7 years lying in bed. I know Isaac's lying down at the moment, but you are able to use a wheelchair. I wasn't even able to use a wheelchair. So it took me a long time to get back to being mobile, and I'm thankfully much more mobile now. But the barriers were, I wanted to run a business, but how can you run a business when you can't sit at a desk or use a computer? And I asked Access to Work, who support disabled people, what do you do for people who can't sit? And they said, everybody can sit. No, they can't. I can't. So I had to develop ways of running a business lying down with a laptop suspended above me. And in those days, there wasn't much of that kind of equipment around. So it was all kind of gaffer tape and, things that were sort of homemade and put together. So those were the barriers that I faced then. Thankfully, I'm more mobile now, but I still have chronic pain. So I'm also a typical disabled person in that I'm one of the 80 to 90% of disabled people who don't look disabled. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a lot of chronic pain. And also my left hand doesn't work very well because the nerves in my neck have compromised that too. So yeah, very different from Isaac, but nevertheless facing barriers.
Thank you, Jane. And Josh, can you sort of explain your background?
Yeah, so it looks like all three of us have scoliosis at least in common, or at least had some sort of spinal surgery. So I have spinal muscular atrophy. It's a neurological condition. So I'm one of the 17% then, Jane, that was born with my condition. So effectively, the muscles get weaker as you get older. So I was diagnosed at 18 months old. I've been in a powered chair now since probably the age of about 10, I think, where I've not been able to walk or stand. Yeah, I had scoliosis, went to college, went to uni, and it wasn't until sort of a couple of years into my uni experience that I had to start looking for work to get an internship. And, being a student, if you've got an opportunity to do a work placement, it really enhances your CV and gives you kind of that extra bit on your CV to employers to make you look potentially more employable, perhaps. And I came up with quite a lot of challenges that we'll probably delve into in a bit more detail later, but particularly around accessible housing, getting to interviews, actually assessment centres, where there's physical activities where people are being assessed on their ability to take control of groups and lead. And that was particularly difficult. And I think there were aspects of the recruitment process that, from my experience, made me feel slightly disadvantaged. So I can't speak for everyone. But as soon as I got to that internship phase, I was like, oh my God, what I've now got to do in order to get a job. And it took me best part of a year to actually land a job. And it was a hard graft.
Yeah. Well, let's start, because what we sort of explore is that whole journey from trying to get a job to then getting into the workplace and progressing your career. So perhaps, Josh, we could go into that in a bit more detail now with you. You like you said, internships, that's even before you've got to the point where you've been offered a job.
Yep.
What were the challenges that you realised that companies just maybe weren't even aware of when they were offering you an internship as a university student?
Yeah, I think a lot of them, just a lot of those kind of HR folk that just perhaps don't necessarily understand in more detail the wider range of disabilities and how people with physical disabilities, they see someone in a wheelchair and they just assume they can get around because they have a powered chair and it's motorized, but they don't necessarily think about everything else that happens in the background. And why would they if they've never had to kind of think about recruiting someone in that position before? And so it's kind of very much, I found myself having to really educate every time I was being interviewed about some of those problems that I would face if I was to get a job. And I think, depending on where employers are within their recruitment process and how quickly they need to recruit, if they know that there's potential that could delay me starting my job, or there could be implications after starting my job, such as finding, care provision if I have to move county to do a job. There are all these other elements or variables that I had to be aware of, but I had to be very open in advance of trying to get a job so that there were no hidden surprises to employers. And I think that naturally kind of maybe made them a bit more apprehensive to recruiting. And I was very fortunate that after about a year of trying to apply for jobs, I actually found a very understanding HR team that I built a relationship with over about a 6-month period. And they realized that what they were providing me in terms of that recruitment process was disadvantaging me a little bit. And so what they did was they changed it around. So I had, rather than having assessment centers, I had, I think, 1 or 2 phone interviews, and then a face-to-face interview. And what was really nice was that I think when they actually sat in a room with me and really listened and understood my kind of capabilities, I think they then realized that I was more than capable of doing the job, or one of the jobs that they were recruiting for. And that way I managed to get in. And I just remember my manager saying, "I've not recruited you because of your disability and I want to give you a role. I've recruited you because I can see your ability to do the job that I need to employ you for." And that was, but I also understand your situation and we'll work through that with you. And I think as soon as you get that manager that recognizes that, it's kind of that breath of fresh air, all that weight then gets lifted off your shoulder. But you kind of have to, I mean, I've always been at that mindset. I'd rather work for a crap company with a good manager than a good company with a crap manager that isn't understanding. So it's just a hard graft, really, Jane.
Yeah. And Jane, this is really what I guess you picked up on during your time when you did become physically disabled, that you realized that this whole recruitment piece was a massive problem.
For sure. And so much so for people with physical disabilities. And I think, as Josh just said, it's not that recruiters are designing things to keep out disabled people. It's that they don't have the understanding of what the barriers might be. And they may be, really quite deep. So it might be something like, if it's an online application form and someone's dexterity, they can't use their hands very well, they may not be able to fill in an online application form, for example. So it could be something as simple as that. It could be something like not being able to get to the venue for the interview. But it's even more insidious than that. It's things like, as Josh has just explained, really, if you're disabled, you're much more likely to be rejected for jobs. So you could have gaps in your CV, which have nothing to do with your ability, but because you've been discriminated against and people won't employ you. So it may well be that someone with a physical disability, their CV bears no relation to their potential. All it shows is what they've been able to, lucky enough maybe, to get. Josh found an HR team that was understanding, but sometimes that's more by luck than judgment. And if you haven't found that, then you could have long gaps in your CV where you've not worked, or you could have really jobs that aren't as good, as good a job as you're capable of doing because you've been discriminated against. So most organizations still will use CVs to do the initial shortlisting. If you have a physical disability, it may well be that you can't get past that stage because your CV won't look as impressive as somebody who's not been discriminated against, even though you may be the best candidate for the job. So there are so many barriers that are in the recruitment process, and that have nothing to do with the talent of the individual who's applying for that job. And actually, we know that disabled people tend to be, we call them premium candidates, because, you know, the three of us, as we've explained, face barriers every day of our lives. And we have to develop skills to navigate around those barriers or find alternative ways of doing things. So you have to become a creative thinker, a problem solver, resilient, determined, having good communication skills. And actually, we bring all of that with us into the workplace. But the CV won't show that if we've been discriminated against. So it's the physical accessing the application form or getting into the building, but also things like the CV being compromised.
And so when you set up Evenbreak, what do you do through Evenbreak to try and make that process much more accessible for people with a physical disability, but also to ensure that recruiters are getting to these talented people that maybe won't otherwise be getting the break that they need?
Yeah, for sure. So what we promote is not using CVs at all. We never use CVs at Evenbreak in our own recruitment process. What we do is we isolate there may be 3 or 4 or 5 absolute must-haves that this role requires, and then say to the candidate, let us know how you can do these things in any way that suits you. So it might be a written submission, it might be they dictate it over the phone, it might be a video, it might be an example of work they've done before. And so all I can shortlist that person on is their ability to do the job. So for example, in Isaac's case, I wouldn't be saying, what's your disability? It's irrelevant. If what I want is someone who can edit films, then I'd be able to say, here's a film, edit it and show me how you can do that. And actually the disability then becomes completely irrelevant. The work history becomes completely irrelevant. We just go on, can this person do this job? And if they do it differently from other people, doesn't matter, so long as the end result is as good as we want it to be.
Yeah, thank you. Isaac, have you applied for jobs with organisations? Because obviously you're freelance in the work that you do, but have you ever tried to apply for jobs and can tell us a little bit about, you know, this terrible process that seems to exist that you know, people just don't understand that the way that they're trying to recruit is not getting to the people that might be best for these jobs?
Yes, I come from a totally different approach to it because, and I should have mentioned this in my introduction, but when I left school, with the structure of school, I just knew I didn't want to do the 9 to 5. I was like, you know, I want to be doing my own thing. I want to be creative. I want to get my creativity out there, and through the A-level media, that's how I knew I wanted to do video editing and content creation. So I actually started off making YouTube videos of my adventures and things that I would get up to, where I self-taught myself video editing for the first part of my life, I guess you could say. And as I was doing that, people saw my skills and then said, oh, you know, would you like to do a video for us? I think the first time I was approached from that was doing a internship of filming young people who were going to create a festival. So it's Festival of Color, the Holi Festival. And they'd asked me to come in and film it, which I said it was fine, but I would need someone then to help me do the actual filming, because they knew I could edit, but then I needed the support of filming. And luckily these people were quite understanding, and it was kind of like a shared responsibility of the leaders, who then I would direct on what would be best when it comes to filming. So yeah, so that's how I came. Yeah, when I started doing work, I think the barriers I've mainly faced was when I was volunteering, and people kind of thinking because I've got disability, I could do everything for free. And back then, or going into the voluntary world, I thought I was just doing a good thing, so I just did it, and I didn't really see it as people really taking advantage of my skills or wanting to speak about my disability. And it only took a lot of people within some organizations to realize actually the bigger picture is you realize they're taking advantage of you. And I was in my head, I was like, oh no, they can't be doing that. You know, I'm doing a good deed and they're appreciating it. But they said, no, you should be charging for it. So that was kind of like a wake up call of, you know, people were taking advantage of my disability, especially when there was like big organizations who did have money. So that's been a bit of a learning curve for me to, you know my time and get people to value that. So yeah, that would be one major thing, that
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid for my time.
Nigel, who's watching the broadcast here, is saying, never do any work for free, Isaac.
Yes.
You've got skills, don't do it for free. Good
Yes.
point there, Nigel. But just staying with you, Isaac, you know, you're freelance, so you've got to pitch. You're almost pitching yourself for a job, you know, every time you go for a piece of work. So how do you manage that now? And do you still feel that there are certain pieces of work that just don't come your way?
It comes with great difficulty because with my mind, I can't just do one thing. So, and I guess it could be slightly my fault that I get involved in so many different things, but I manage that all myself, and I am entitled for support. So we've mentioned about access to work, and that's something that I've applied for, and luckily I have an advocate with me. But that's very difficult when you take time to send in the application, everything that you require, and then for the advisor to turn around and say, oh no, that's not a viable business, and becomes the judge and jury and says, oh no, it needs to be better. And that's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. And I've also realized, you know, when you want the support, you have to sound very vulnerable. They don't like to hear when you can be seen as successful. You have
They
to
don't
say,
like
oh no,
capable people. That's crazy, isn't it?
yes, yeah, you have to say what you can't do rather than what you can do. And you know, if I told them what I can do and I have the support, I can do it a lot better and a lot more efficiently. But you have to, for these grants, you have to say, oh no, I can't do this or I can't do that. And that can really be emotionally downing. You know, you have to put yourself down just to get the support. And with my last experience with access to work, was feeling of just calling it quits. But with the advocate with me, it's like, no, we will get you this, and because you do deserve it. Because you do feel like a bit of imposter syndrome of like, do I actually deserve this? Knowing that I do, but when the advice say, oh no, it's not viable, you're not going to be successful, it's like, oh gosh, you know, I have to do better. So at the moment, and it just becomes so much doing the admin, the video editing, the public speaking, all myself. It just becomes so much that sometimes I forget things or I'm slow at responding to people, which I hate doing. But if I had that support, I'd be so much more productive in getting more work and doing it more efficiently and getting it done on time. So yeah, these government schemes need to kind of understand, you know, if you support us, we can actually do work and do it well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on. But I think you've all explained how tricky that recruitment process can be and the challenges that are faced around that. But let's move now to the sort of when you've got a job offer and the next sort of set of challenges that present themselves. So Josh, when you got your internship and you then moved into work, can you explain some of the challenges that you faced around there and either the help or the lack of help that you got then when you were in the workplace?
I mean, it was very scary. I had moved back into uni for my final year. It was like end of August, beginning of September, and I moved in on the Thursday, and I was starting my final year on the Monday, and I'd been trying to apply for jobs for over a year. And this company that I was, Hewlett Packard, that I was kind of liaising with for 6 to 9 months, they contacted me on the Friday and said, Josh, we want you to start on the 1st of October and we need you to move to Reading. So here I am in my final year, all settled. And now within best part of 4 to 6 weeks, they now want me to go and start my job in Reading, where I'm reliant on at that point around 6 or 7 hours of support for personal care a day. And I then needed to go and find accommodation that was suitable for me to live in within a reasonable commute to the job. And I asked them, where are the interns living? What's the situation with them? Because they bundle all the interns together and the graduates together to make it easy for them to, live together and get to know each other. Well, funnily enough, there was nothing that they had that was kind of accessible for me. There was nowhere that they could signpost. So then I had to go and find accommodation on my own. And I soon realized that, you were trying to find a needle in a haystack, and effectively you had to get your own needle, chuck it in, and then go and find it again. It's absurd. And what ended up happening was my local authority, with my adult social worker, realized that the employment opportunity of me getting this job was so, after my degree, that this opportunity would make me more employable. And so she really backed my corner. And cut a very, very long story short, the local authority that that I was in at the time ended up funding something like £40,000 or £50,000 for a 10-month placement for me to live in a neuro rehabilitation centre with people with brain injuries, very aggressive dementia, suicide. And here I am at the age of 20 years of age, in a neuro rehabilitation centre, because it was the only place that was accessible that they could find that could give me the support to enable me to get up at the hours that I needed. And I then had a 50-minute to an hour commute to work and then an hour back. And it's not fair to have a 20-year-old that has to live in a place like that, where the system isn't flexible enough to allow young people to move based on the requirement of jobs. And so you then have to, go and fight all of these applications, like Isaacs was saying, with access to work. There's these constant fights to justify your need to go and do work, but yet the government want you in work. So it's a very much catch-22 where you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And it's the constant fight. And, not everyone is going to get that access to that support. And I just think if we've got this systemic barrier where we have a lack of housing, a lack of care provision, difficulties getting support to get you to a job interview in the first place, and then struggle to get an application to then put in the support to keep you in work, what do you want us to do? And it's just tiring all the time. So again, I was very lucky. I had a good support network around me that really wanted to fight my corner. But if you haven't got that, what do you do? So yeah, it was a very interesting time, and luckily, it all worked out in the end. But mentally, those 10 months living in a place like that was very, very hard.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. And what a terrible experience, Josh, on behalf of everybody, I think, that's watching and taking part in this today. That's absolutely horrendous. And Jane, I mean, I guess Josh's story is it's not the only one you've ever heard.
Sadly not. No, it's fairly common. One of the silver linings that came out of the pandemic, and I know it was a horrific thing for everybody, but, there were some silver linings, was the recognition that actually people can work from home. And so that meant that for some people where the transport is inaccessible, or the building is inaccessible, it opened up some opportunities to work from home. The danger of that was that some employers were thinking, oh, right, okay, well, all the disabled people can work from home and all the non-disabled people can come into the office, which is the last thing we want, that segregation. And of course, a lot of disabled people don't want to work from home. They enjoy the social interaction at work. And also there are lots of non-disabled people who do want to work from home. So it's kind of a mixed blessing in some respects. But, we still have buildings that are inaccessible, technology that's inaccessible. Some organizations might think about getting in the building, but then it's getting around the building. It's about having accessible toilets. It's about, I can get to my desk, but can I get to the photocopier, for example? And then the dilemma for the new recruit is, do I ask for everything I need and on day one seem like I'm being a real nuisance? Or do I try and get by without asking for what I need, in which case it's going to be a really unpleasant experience, which, non-disabled people don't have to face that dilemma. And I do know of people who chose not to drink during the day so that they wouldn't need the toilet. And that was the only way they could get into the office. I mean, that's not healthy for anybody because the toilets weren't accessible, for example. So, yeah, I think we have a long way to go when it comes to the accessibility of buildings, and also understanding, as Josh said, that people sometimes have to relocate for jobs, and that's difficult for anybody. If you've got kids at school, you've got to move schools and all that. But if you're physically disabled and you need accommodation that is accessible, and you need a care package there as well, it's almost impossible. And, for employers to understand that that's an additional ask of that new recruit. Having said that, these things aren't unsurmountable. I wouldn't want any employer out there thinking it's too difficult, I'm never going to employ somebody with a physical disability, because they are all problems that can be overcome. It might be either people can work from home for some or part of the time, or it might be the job could be carved. So there are some parts of the job that if maybe you can't get to the photocopier, somebody else can do that for you. So there are usually ways around it. If the employer has got the will to become inclusive, there are lots of solutions. And usually, as physically disabled people, we are the ones that come up with those solutions because we do that every day of our lives anyway.
Yeah, Isaac, obviously you work from home. That's your base. You've got all this technology around you, but from that point of view, sort of Jane was saying, home working can be good, but can also be quite a challenge. What would you say to sort of employers that are listening about the sort of technology and setup that you require at home to help you actually do the job that you've been employed to do?
So one of the reasons why I mainly do work from home is because I have a really good setup here, and I know, as Jane said, I don't want to be seen in my head, and it's something I still got to get over in some aspects. But I feel like if I do ask for a bed or something to be able to work in an office, for example, I don't really want to be seen as a nuisance, even though I know I'm not. Um, but having everything's up here, I know that I can work efficiently and productively and with great comfort, that I can just get on with the work. But there are like, for example, I can't, when it comes to filming, however, or some public speaking engagements, I can't do that at home because I need to be on a film shoot or I need to be on stage. So I do like how out of the pandemic there was that hybrid way of working. But I do feel employers forget that people should have a choice, not one or the other. I think it's like whatever works for that person, we should be doing. I like the mixture of being able to do things at home because I can be in a lot of pain some days, but then going out and doing things face to face, I feel a lot more connected with people, and being able to really share that message of what I do to people, I feel is better done in person. So having that choice is definitely something a lot of employers do need to see. And Jane, when you talk about the drinking, that's something that I can relate to, especially when I do go out independently and have a lot of traveling. I sometimes don't drink as well because I need someone to support me to the toilet, for example. And sometimes that's not there. So I have to kind of suffer. And in the summer, it can be quite bad when you're not drinking, but it's also warm, and yeah, it can get quite messy, really, with like dehydration, and it's not healthy, really. But if I had the support in place, I would be able to have that happen. But yeah, it's that challenge and that stress of getting it all in place.
It's very much
and
about the social model of disability, isn't it? There's nothing actually wrong with us. If the support was in place and places were accessible, then
Yeah.
we wouldn't be disabled. It's not our condition that disables us. It's the fact that we live in an environment that's not designed for people like us. And that's what the barrier is, really. And I think if employers could recognize that, then rather than worrying about the disability, they could be thinking more about access and about how we remove barriers, how we make it possible for people, to move around. We're all disabled at Evenbreak. we only employ disabled people. So we all have different kinds of conditions, and we all work from home because, as Isaac said, you can make your own home work for you. But we recognize that people also get a lot from that interaction with people, that face-to-face interaction with people. So we look for opportunities to get together. It might be an exhibition, it might be an event, it might be a meeting where we do all get together. And yes, it's harder for us because we have to think about accessible transport. And, you know, if we're using a hotel, is the hotel accessible? You know, some people might need a hoist, or they might need an adjoining room for a support worker or whatever it is. But then we think, well, if we can't sort that out, we're in the wrong game, really. And it's important to recognize that not just because somebody chooses to work from home, they never want to leave their house. That should be an option. If somebody doesn't want to leave their house, of course, it should never be mandatory that they leave, but that opportunity to get together and do that in-person stuff. I know that, you know, all of the Evenbreak teams say it's great when we get together. I mean, we might not want to do it every day, but, you know, when we do get together, you get a real kind of high from meeting people in person, as opposed to like this, you know, online.
Yeah, because that's the thing, Josh, it can be quite isolating, and you can feel quite lonely, can't you, if all you ever do is do this, you know, you're just talking to folk online all the time.
Yeah, I must say, me personally, I really miss actually being in an office around people. I'm one of those individuals that kind of crave being around other people, and the more isolated I am, the harder I find it. And I think since running a business and since COVID, and then having to work from home, I've found it really, really difficult. Don't get me wrong, I'm probably slightly more productive when I'm home sometimes, but it's also very easy to kind of get lazy as well, I find. Whereas if you're in the office and you know your manager's floating around over your shoulder, like, oh crap, I best be working because they're watching me. So kind of like there's pros and cons to both. And I think, you know, the theme coming out here is choice. And I think that, you know, that's absolutely right. And I think, you know, I kind of have this view that, you know, certainly the larger organizations of the world that run all of these intern and graduateship programs and your big technology companies, they're kind of, they are the ones that I think in some respects are leading the way on a larger scale to, you know, show others how to do it right. So for instance, I was in Vienna at the UN back in February, and I spoke to one employer, a huge, large global organization. And in some of their geographical areas now, they're actually running schemes where they're supporting new hires that need support and are actually providing kind of that care provision to help people. So I think the message in there is that, you know, these organizations need to make a conscious effort to understand. And once you understand, you realize actually it's not that difficult. And there are these frameworks, there are these other entities out there that can provide finance, physical resources, whatever it might be, but also making sure that you understand the individual, because at the end of the day, I get this a lot in the aviation industry where we're trying to train and raise awareness to people or organizations around a disability. But for instance, my disability can vary so much to somebody else with the same disability and have totally different requirements. And so I think we fall in this trap of trying to generalize when actually it's all about listening, confirming that you've listened and understood that. And then once you've done that, you then act on what you've agreed is what you've understood to be correct. And you just be that good person that is sensitive and understanding. And I think a lot of cases, that's all it is. It's just being good humans with some level of sensitivity and understanding and just being nice to people. And when you get that, everything just seems to work.
Listen, all three of you have set up your own businesses, which is kind of interesting because we've sort of been alluding to bigger organizations, and Josh, you sort of said it there. It's maybe easier for these bigger multinational organizations, you know, companies that are employing several thousand people. What about for smaller businesses? You know, what would be your advice to somebody who's running a smaller business?
I think when I say easier, I don't necessarily, there's a lot more bureaucracy in a larger organization and structure. And I'm not saying it's easy for them to just do it. What I'm saying is it's easier for them to add clout and raise the profile of what they're doing. I'm not saying it's easy for them to do that, because it's not. it's probably much easier for your smaller organizations to be a little bit more nimble and agile, like Jane, where you haven't got all of that red tape and bureaucracy and approvals to get things, chains of approvals. But I think, there are smaller organizations that, because of that less bureaucracy, it's easier to kind of support and understand and get things through, like access to work, for instance. I think getting applications in and getting finance approved, for me running my business, it's really easy because I'm in control and I'm the manager of that. But if you're then having to provide that evidence to your manager, who then needs to provide it to someone else to sign off to then submit, it's just all of these added chains in large organizations can make it more difficult to just get things done. So I think it is easier potentially and more flexible in smaller to medium organizations. But then if you haven't got the money as a small organization to make infrastructure changes, let's say, I was trying to find an office rental for my business, and to find somewhere that's accessible is extremely difficult to find as a startup. And so I'm forced to have to work from home. But I think there's lots, Jane. I mean, I could waffle all day long. But I mean, I'm going to leave it there and let Jane and Isaac kind of take.
I was going to say, well, we've only got we've not got too long left. So, by the way, if anybody who's watching has got questions for the panel, please do submit them in the comments now. We'd love to hear what you've got to say, or even just some insight that you want to share. But Jane, coming to you, you set up your own business. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to some of the things that you've had to do? You say that everybody that works for you has a disability of some sort. So you've made a conscious decision that is your kind of USP, I guess. But yeah, tell us about being a small business owner.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a perception that it's easier for larger businesses because they have the resources. But actually, what we find is that in larger organizations, they often feel they have to mold the person into the job. Whereas in a smaller business, you can mold the job around the person. And so what we find at Evenbreak is that somebody might apply for a job and they could do 80% of it absolutely brilliantly. But for whatever reason, there might be 20% of it that they can't do. That doesn't mean we're not going to employ them. It means we look at that job differently and think, okay, so maybe you can do that 80% and we'll either employ someone to do the other 20%, or maybe we can look at the team and do job carving. And that kind of works really well for us. And it means you can be very flexible and agile. It also means that it's a good business thing to do, whether you're employing disabled people or not. Most of us don't like or can't do all of our job really well. There might be a lot of it that we enjoy doing, that we're really good at, but there are always going to be some parts of the job that we hate or that we're just not really very good at. And if we can think about playing to people's strengths and carving those tasks amongst the team, there might be some people who are really good at ideas, but not very good at detail. Somebody else in the team might really love detail. So in Evenbreak, for example, I'm not great at detail, but our COO loves a spreadsheet. So she does the detail of the spreadsheet and I do the other stuff. And actually that makes sense for any organization. It's not as hard as it sounds. I think the other thing, going back to what Josh was just saying about people being the expert in what they need, I think there's a lot of fear around disability, and a lot of hiring managers, whether it's a small or a large organization, think, oh, I need to be the expert and know everything. So if someone says I have spinal muscular atrophy type 2, most people won't know what that means. And even if they did know what it means, everybody with that condition is going to experience it differently and want different kinds of access needs. And so people don't need to be experts. Nobody is an expert in every disability and every barrier. It's just as Josh says about having the confidence to have that conversation. What do you need me as your employer to do for you to thrive here? And that person will know what their access needs are. It's no good me saying, oh, well, I employed somebody with your condition last year and they needed ABC, so you'll need ABC. They might need X, Y, Z. So the best approach is always to say to the candidate, if it's in a recruitment process, or the new recruit, if it's someone you've employed, we want you to thrive here. Tell us what you need to do. And it's that simple.
Isaac, it's you've all mentioned it. It's about accessibility, isn't it? I guess, and not disability at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, from what Jane and Josh have been saying, I can give a good example that only happened, well, it led up to yesterday. So I was on a in-person podcast as a guest talking about DEI and well-being in the workplace. And she usually does the podcast virtually because people are abroad and they can't always just get there. But she has a studio, um, and I said, "Oh, it would be great to do one in person." And without any hesitation, she was like, "Okay, this is what the studio looks like. Is it accessible? What can I do to make sure that you can get up onto the stage?" And I said, "Oh, I require a ramp." And then she then asked me, okay, what kind of ramps is it? And then I gave her some options. And that's what more employers need to do, just having that conversation, because she didn't come across as this expert saying, oh, it's accessible or it's not. It's like, oh, what do you need so I can get you on that stage so you can be part of this podcast? There wasn't any second guessing. It was just like, let's see how we can make this work. And yeah, I was able to go there yesterday, and it was quite flawless from that conversation that the ramp was there. I got on and it was fine. I got on straight away. So it's more employers do need to have that open dialogue, and not have these assumptions, because we all know that assumptions can go terribly wrong, especially if we group it together, like all wheelchair users need this or that. We just got to have this open dialogue and speaking to people. And I'm a very strong believer. If you don't know, you don't know. I've learned so much being within the disability community about those with physical disabilities and neurodiversity. Like, I've just learned so much just by speaking to people and hearing lived experiences. And I've just got to a point now realizing that just everyone's unique, and we just got to do it based on individuals.
So just going to go around the table with a final couple of questions. And the first one, maybe Isaac, I'll just stay with you for this one. But by not adapting and not listening and not understanding, what are employers? Who are employers excluding from work?
They're excluding everyone, because I'm also I say this in most of my talks, is accessibility is for everyone. Anyone at any given time can get into an accident or have a health condition that may be long or short term. So by making your place not accessible, you're actually saying no to everybody. Because, for example, if a manager breaks their leg one day and they're in a wheelchair for a couple of months, how are they going to get up those flight of stairs or be able to get into the office? You're excluding not just people with disabilities, but everybody. And who's ever complained about something being accessible? It's if entrance is wide enough and accessible for everybody, then anyone can enter. So yeah, having something not accessible or inclusive is putting a barrier up for everybody.
Yeah, Josh, what about you? Who do you think employers are excluding by not being aware of this?
The first word that popped into my head was nothing. Same as Isaac. I mean, I'd be more scared about what you're missing out on, because you don't realize what you're missing out on until you've actually got it. And so I think for me, I'd be driven by the fear of not taking advantage of employing everyone, and making sure, because you learn so much by doing it as well, which I think you just gain so much insight as well, and I think it will it is a very enjoyable process. And like Isaac, since kind of being more involved in this world of disability, I mean, I've plodded my whole life on just doing my own thing, and just even speaking with other people with SMA has just broadened my vision and my mindset in so many different ways, that I approach my life quite differently now than what I did sort of 4 or 5 years ago. So I'd like to think that I personally, for doing that, I am in a much better place than what I was. And that's just one example. So I think, yeah, to Isaac's point, you're missing out on everyone by not doing it.
Yeah, Jane, I'm sure you'll agree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have a job board for disabled people, and we have thousands and thousands of candidates. And obviously I haven't met them all. There's too many of them, but there is so much talent out there that isn't being utilized. And that's not just difficult for the individuals concerned. It means that businesses are missing out on that talent. And certainly at the moment, in pretty much every sector, there is skill shortages. You know, we've got clients saying, we can't fill our roles in tech, we can't fill our roles in manufacturing, we can't fill our roles wherever. And, you know, there's a skill shortage, there's a talent shortage. And I would say there isn't. We're just not looking in the right places. And so I think, you know, organizations are missing out on an awful lot of talent. Sometimes they think that employing disabled people is an act of charity or is giving somebody a chance. Actually, it's not about that. It's about talent. And they're missing out on a huge pool of untapped talent that's out there. Why would you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's round off the conversation then with really some practical advice that the people that are watching can take away back into their workplaces with them. Josh, do you want to sort of head off on this one? I mean, what would be your kind of sort of overriding message to the people tuned in with us today?
Treat everyone as individuals, listen to them, reassure and confirm that you understand what you think you've understood from what they've said to you, and then just act with the right intent, and don't be, you know, afraid to ask those questions. I think it's often the approach of how you ask or when you ask is the difference between getting it right and getting it wrong, and making someone feel uncomfortable. So for me, it's as simple as that.
Isaac, what would you like to leave people with?
Yeah, I think it's mainly just having that open dialogue with people, and as Josh said, you know, just having those conversations, and realizing that it's okay to get it wrong. You know, I think too much people feel like they have to get it right all the time, and they want it to be perfect, but actually attempting and trying is better than doing nothing. I think just showing that you're wanting to get it right, or you're showing that you want to be part of the conversation, or you're wanting to learn and engage, I think that's better than doing nothing or thinking, oh no, if I do this, then I'm not going to get it right. But you know, you have to really just start engaging and having the right intention, because that's how you really become accessible. And it will never get to a end destination or perfect, because life's always changing. People's disabilities are changing too. So, you know, I see it as a journey as well, a learning journey, that every day is going to be a school day from this point onwards.
Thank you. And Jane, would you like to round off?
Yeah, I mean, I think just really echoing what Isaac and Josh said, it's about not being frightened of disability or disabled people. Disabled people just face more barriers than others. That's as simple as it is, really. We're still human beings with all the rest of the same characteristics that everybody else has. And I think it is just that, being led by lived experience, instead of having to think, I've got to have all the answers. It's fine not to have the answers. It's fine to ask others, whether it's the person themselves, whether it's going to an organization that might be able to support. You know, it's okay to be vulnerable and not to know, so long as the intention is. And then I think the other thing alongside that is, if that intention is there, make that really public, shout about it. You know, as an organization, we really want your talent. We might not always get it right, but our intention is, we're on this journey and we want you to help us on this journey, so that disabled people know, oh, actually, this is an organization where I can go and work and thrive and be listened to. Because the biggest barrier that disabled people face is not knowing which organizations will take them seriously. So employers have to work that little bit harder, just to make sure that candidates know, yeah, we really are open for your talent. You know, we want you to tell us what you can do. We want you to help us get it right for you. And yeah, shout about it, you know, be open about the fact that you're looking for and value talent that's diverse and maybe a bit different from others.
Fantastic. That's a great message to take away for everybody today. Thank you, all three of you, for a really brilliant conversation. And I think there's quite a lot that people will be scuttling away to the workplaces now and thinking, oh, maybe we've got this, you know, we've got the wrong attitude here. So hopefully you've helped change a few minds. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in and who's been watching this wonderful conversation. The conversation was brought to you by Frog Systems. Wellbeing streaming service Ashir is a complete on-demand platform full of personal stories, expert opinion and conversations like this to help you be better managers, as well as signposted support and resources to support your employees through the life challenges that they face. So do visit our website for more, where you can sign up for a free trial and also follow us on social media. Thank you to Isaac, to Josh, to Jane for a really fascinating conversation today. And I hope this conversation helps you to bring change to your workplaces. So do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.